This is Sawyer Robertson, and you're listening to the Bearcast on SicEm365.com.
Welcome into the Bearcast on SicEm365.com, presented by WellMed Medical Management. I'm your host, Grayson Grundhoefer, and today I'm here with Colt, Barber, and we're going to talk about breakouts. Breakout players for Baylor's 2025 season. We're going to go through each position and give you our breakout player for the 2025 season. Colt, today we're going to start with quarterback, which I feel like is a pretty easy answer. Depending on how you define breakout, I understand that people may have different definitions, but I think what we saw from Sawyer Robertson a year ago is just a glimpse of what we're going to see in the 2025 season.
Yeah, I mean, you know, we can talk about how much he didn't play to begin the season and et cetera, but for him to put up 3,000 passing yards, 28 touchdowns, over 30 total touchdowns last year in basically 11 games, I mean, that was impressive. And if you move that to just say he starts every game last year and he does moderately well, I mean, he's over 3,500 yards and over 35 touchdowns total. And passing, you know, he's closing in on 4,000 yards last year if he just starts those two games. So I'm completely expect him in this scheme to do really well. If you go back to Jake Spavital's track record with quarterbacks, like, this is pretty standard for what he does with quarterbacks, is these numbers. Now, 4,000 yards is a lot of yards considering their schedule. He's going to have a couple games where he's throwing for over 500 yards to get to this 4,000. You know, 2-game stretch where he gets 1,000, and the rest of the season he's building on that. Which games are those? It's going to be tough to do it against Samford. You know, that's not a game where you just rack up a lot of yards anymore. That's not how these schemes work, and you're trying to rest guys, especially after playing Auburn and SMU. But for Sawyer, I really like his receiver core. I like the targets around him. And I don't want to say it's going to be easy to get to 3,500 yards, but like, he can do it pretty easily if he's just consistent. And so, yeah, I mean, 4,000 yards on the national scale is absolutely breakout. 40 total touchdowns, breakout type of year. Those are the numbers you listed. And if he's, you know, I thought he broke out last year. You don't really have another case for another quarterback this year, but like, he's going to be really good. And you know, if he has a major step back, then obviously reason for concern for Baylor's season. But you don't expect a guy in this type of system to take a major step back, at least statistically. So I'm excited to see him this year in that next step that he can take.
I think he broke out last year for Baylor fans, but I don't think it was until this offseason when everyone wanted to try to make him the Oklahoma or Tennessee quarterback that he broke out actually, like where people started talking about him as one of the best quarterbacks in the Big 12, as, you know, this guy. I think that's the difference, right? Because last year he wasn't in contention for Big 12 Player of the Year honors. He wasn't really in contention for first string All Big 12 because he didn't play the full year. I think those awards are on the table this year. And I think that's what kind of changes the things for him nationally. I think he's going to get a lot more recognition this year and have a bigger year because he's simply going to play more games. And frankly, Baylor's going to play in bigger games too. Getting to showcase yourself against Auburn and at SMU in your first, you know, couple games, that's a pretty big deal. So everyone's probably going to know his name pretty quickly. Okay, moving on to running back. This position was an interesting one. I think for me, there's a pretty clear breakout, but with the Dawson Pendergrass injury, it's kind of one of those things where, man, Bryson Washington could like break some Baylor records this year potentially. But I'm going to go with Caden Knighton. I've been pretty just consistent with this since the spring. I think he was going to have a role regardless of what Dawson Pendergrass did, regardless of if he got hurt or not. I think Knighton was going to play a ton. And now he gets a ton of RB2 carries. I don't love the depth they have behind those two. I haven't seen enough to say, oh, their RB3 like Joseph Dodds or Michael Turner are going to be super productive this year. I haven't seen enough for me to say that, but I have seen enough for me to say Caden Knighton is going to be extremely productive alongside Bryson Washington. I think he's going to have an awesome year. I'm looking at around 800 total yards of offense, 8 to 10 scores. And if Bryson Washington were to miss time, you could see 1,000-yard season for the freshman running back. Real quick, Sawyer Robertson has something to remind you about.
Want the latest information about your favorite team? Try out SIGM 365 premium content the next 3 months for just $5 by clicking the link below.
And now back to the Bearcast. You could see a 1,000-yard season for the freshman running back.
Yeah, I mean and you don't want Bryson to go out, but there's always that realistic possibility, and to see, even if it's just a game where he's just resting, if it's Samford, he says, hey, we're going to take these carries off of him and he doesn't have to play. I think that he's going to get carries in that game regardless of what happens, but you can't imagine it being too many. So Caden Knighton's the safe pick. If it's going to be Bryson, what's that number need to be? Looking at Baylor's statistical history, Abram Smith, number one single season rushing record was 1,601 yards. That was in 2021. Terrence Ganaway back in 2011. So 10 years between those, he rushed for 1,547 yards. So like that to me for Bryson, that he would have to get in that range. You still have Shock Linwin there, 1,300 yards, 1,200 yards. Jay Finley, 1,200 yards. Walter Abercrombie, 1,100 yards in 1981. So where does that number need to go to? I mean, based on what he did last year, for him to be considered the breakout running back for Baylor, I mean, he's got to get in the 1,300-yard range. And I don't think that's unrealistic. I mean, you think about that. He didn't play in the first two games and then didn't play against LSU minus those 5 carries until he got knocked out of the game with a concussion. So he could have very well approached that number last year had he not missed those first 2 games. And that was moderate carries, just splitting a lot of carries. So if he goes in this year, ends up with 200 carries on the season and can average 5.5 yards a carry, he's in pretty good territory to do that.
And I think the yards are less likely than the touchdowns. I think the touchdowns record is the one that I would be kind of looking. I think it's like 20 is the record.
21, Terrence Ganaway, 21 in 2011. Yeah.
Again, if you're just saying, hey, we're going to give him, 3 touchdowns against Samford on the goal line, we're going to give him all the goal line carries, then you could see that number be approached. I do think, again, they're going to play other guys, and so it's going to take away that upside, which is why I think Knighton is the safer and probably more realistic breakout pick because of what Bryson did a year ago.
You mentioned that. This is funny. Looking at these stats, how many touchdowns could he potentially get against Samford if they give him carries? Jonathan Golden, I remember this game actually. 2002, guess who they were playing? He had 5 touchdowns.
I already looked this up at Samford.
Oh, yeah. Isn't that crazy? Like, let's see what happens here. But yeah, it's like you never know what happens. You don't give those to Dawson, and he might be racking them up. He had 12 last year, and that's top 10 all time at Baylor. That was tied with Jay Finley and Abram Smith. So he gets 13, 14, ties Bryce Petty. Glasgow Martin had 15 in 2012. So yeah, I mean, that's my, you if you're breaking out after you have already 1,000 yards for a season in your career, you better be up there in the top 5 in statistical categories for Baylor football history.
Definitely. Okay, let's move to wide receiver, where I think we're going to have a few names to discuss here. So I went with Lewis Brown, the 4th, for this breakout wide receiver spot. I think my reasoning for this is that he kind of bursted onto the scene. I don't think a lot of people talked about him too much when they added him in the summer. I know we did on SIGM 365 Premium, but he's a guy who I just think fits really well with what they're trying to do from a contested catch standpoint, from the area of the field that he really excels. I mean, when you look at his targets of 20-plus yards down the field, he has a 92.9 PFF grade. Yeah. He's sensational in that regard, sensational in contested catches. I think all of that really kind of leads me to think he's going to have a breakout year. And the hard part about the wide receiver position is we're saying it's a breakout because it's what you're doing at Baylor. But when you look at the guys like Kobe Prentice, Cole Wilson, and Lewis Brown, they all do have production at other places. So it's kind of hard to say they're going to have their best season ever. I think you can probably make that case a little bit better for, Kobe Prentice. But I do think for Lewis Brown, taking a step up in competition, just like Cole Wilson is, I do think if you're able to post similar numbers to what you did at the G5 level, then I do think that is a breakout in the Big 12.
Yeah, I mean, similar boat as Ashton Hawkins last year, coming from Texas State, has a really good year last year. And that's with, a lot of, if he's in a different offensive scheme and he's, one of 2 good receivers, he's getting a lot more targets and a lot more touches. Iowa State's a great example. 2 1,000-yard receivers, that was kind of their main priority guys. But at Baylor, there were a ton of guys getting targets. You throw in a good tight end as well. So you're going with Lewis. I'm going to go with Cole. And just from the standpoint of I think you look at what Monterey Baldwin did when he was targeted, we know his consistency issues, but they wanted to attack vertically with him. I truly think that Cole can, because of his ability, but also because of the other guys that he's gonna be playing around, he's gonna get some of those looks. Like, not to go back to 2014, 2015 with Corey Coleman, but like when guys are around speed guys and they're getting one-on-one coverages, and you have a quarterback, Lewis Brown, to your credit, similar reasons, but like if Cole's getting vertical and one-on-one coverages, he might have a chance for a big year. You want Sawyer to be consistent with that. And so I go in that direction with Cole, because I think numbers-wise, he probably ends up being potentially better than Lewis, because I think Lewis and Josh are going to, they're going to trade off some of those big contested catch type numbers, and that's going to take away from Lewis's number. I don't think anyone else is going to challenge Cole with the true vertical deep shots as much. But we'll see. I think they're both great suggestions. Like, I think that both of these guys, either one of them, they might end up with very similar numbers. I mean, you look at last year's stats, all of those guys outside of Josh were pretty much grouped together, between 300, 600 yards roughly. And Sawyer's not going to play favorites. He's going to go to the guys that are going to make plays when they need to make plays. But I really like Cole, and I think that his speed is something that they need, but his hands are better than what they've had in the past in this particular offense.
And Cole, I think, or last year, I think Monterey left a lot on the table with his drops and kind of the route running. And I do think Cole will fill in that role. I think I'm a little more confident with Lewis, because I do think Kobe is going to eat in to what Cole's ceiling might be in this offense.
Yeah,
a little bit more than Lewis. Okay, moving into the tight end position, Michael Trigg is my selection for breakout at tight end. And here's the deal. He was good last year. Like, I'm not saying he wasn't good last year, but he was not the level that he, in my eyes, should be and needs to be at and will be at this upcoming
especially
season. Yes, statistically. Like, his blocking was way better than I thought it was going to be. It's going to allow him to play a ton of snaps. But in the receiving game, I truly think, again, if you're going to break out, you have to break records. I think he's going to break Drake Dadney's 2023 receiving yardage record of 552 yards. I think he's going to put up a 600-yard season. I think he's going to have 6 touchdowns. There's room for more than that. But I do think for him to elevate himself to being potentially the all Big 12 tight end and also breaking some of Baylor's big records, I think that's what could be in store for Trigg. I do think this will be a breakout year, and he'll ascend from being a really good player that we love talking about because of the athleticism and the flashes to being a more consistent player.
Yeah. What did he play? 10 games last year? Missed at OSU, missed
BYU.
Suspension. So don't be suspended. Be healthy, and you should pass these numbers. I think that you start talking about Bryson Washington getting more touches in the red zone. Michael Trigg, great example. Like, if teams are focusing on Bryson Washington in the red zone, Michael Trigg is going to, I mean, that's a matchup nightmare. And we saw it how many times where it's just kind of like, it was the Houston game, whatever game, Iowa State, he had a couple of them. Kind of all of his touchdowns were like that. And it's just, he's a beast. I mean, his basketball background provides that. So he might be a guy that sneakily gets closer to 10 touchdowns because of Baylor's need to have red zone scoring, inside, right outside the 5, maybe not at the goal line, but right in that area. He's a guy, but yeah, I don't want to spend too much time on that, but he's a freak. And I think he's undervalued in Big 12 discussions, but also nationally, because he's, in my mind, the best NFL prospect that Baylor has on their roster. If everything clicks with him, he can stay on the field, not be in trouble, stay focused. He can be a really good NFL player.
I agree. All right, let's move to the offensive line. It was hard on the offensive line because I think a lot of these guys broke out a little bit last year. You see some cohesiveness, but I went with Colton Price here. And the reason I went with Colton Price is strictly based on this. After the bowl game, everyone was so down on Colton because he had a tough game. His snaps were really bad in that game. I understand he struggled. But I think he was much better than that throughout the season. I think there's room for him to take a big step forward. I think there's reasons to believe of all the guys on the offensive line, this is the guy that should take the biggest jump. And the reason I say that is because he was still young last year. Like, he was a younger player. I mean, he still has 2 more years left.
Yeah.
So, I mean, like, he was still not quite ready, I would say, last year. And now I think he's fully going to be ready physically. I think he's going to be really, really good. This is one of those things where, again, consistency, the fact that he's got more experience now, and the fact that he's helping lead this offensive line to another level. I think there's a big step there and a bigger step forward than guys I think we saw break out last year when you look at Omar Gbedian, Sidney Fugar, Ryan Lingyel. Like, I think those guys, we pretty much know who they are now. I think with Colton Price, I do think there's another level that he can get to reach those guys.
Yeah, I mean, that center position, you have so many responsibilities. Snapping the ball being your first and prior, if you can't snap the ball, you ain't playing center. Sorry, but like you've got to be able to do that. You're calling a lot more things. He's going to help them, the offensive line, getting where they're supposed to be. But yeah, I think it's tough because you're talking about an offensive line that has 4 returning starters. Some of those guys, kind of Ryan Lingyel broke out last year. Like, how much? Yep. What's the next step for him? Like, he wasn't even expected to be a contributor. If I'm picking one, though, like, I'm probably going with Sidney Fugar. And the reason is because he is so big and so athletic that the potential is still through the roof. Like, there was a reason he went from Western Illinois to South Carolina, and everyone was so excited about him then. Didn't pan out, so he leaves and comes to Baylor. And then this offseason, he said, I left South Carolina saying I'm not going to let that happen again. And so if he truly has that mindset with his athletic ability and his size and his strength in this scheme, PFF grades, whatever, he could be really, really good in this particular scheme. If he is becoming consistent. Now, he only played left tackle last year for Baylor. How many games? 6 games? 7 games?
Second half of the year. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and that's when Baylor's offensive line took off. So, if I'm picking one, I think his upside is just tremendous. Now, where does he potentially play in the NFL? Probably on the interior, but he's athletic enough right now to play on the outside. I just have to go in that route. If he takes his game to another level, this entire offense to me has the potential to go to another level because he's just a freak. He's 345 pounds and he moves. Like, we've seen the videos of him moving on the field, and I'm going with him because of that. I think, center position's hard to, it's like you kind of are what you are for a lot of ways, but Sidney is just a different level athlete. If he can break out and become that stud at left tackle for Baylor, kind of like these systems usually produce, that's massive for him, but I think it's massive for Baylor in 2025.
Definitely would be a big one. And he's a guy that certainly has a lot of upside. So we'll see kind of how that plays out. We both went with guys who were on the offensive line last year. So no Caden Siraki quite yet for the breakout spot. Moving to the defensive line, a very interesting group here. And so my case here is kind of more about a guy being put in the position he should have been playing his entire time at Baylor. And so I'm going to go with Cooper Lance here. And listen, you can go a lot of different directions. Like, I think Jackie's going to have his best year ever. I think, there's some defensive tackles that you could talk about. I love Devontae Tizino. I've talked about him a ton, but I think Cooper moving to a more natural position, being defensive tackle, defensive end type, is massive for him. This guy had 15 sacks and 39 tackles for loss his final 2 seasons while playing defensive end in high school. He was an absolute wrecking havoc machine at a 6A level of football. Like, he was awesome in that role. And then he comes to Baylor and has to play nose tackle out of necessity. And that just stunk. It really stinks for him. You go look at his stats. His stats are terrible because he's just anchoring at nose tackle at 290 pounds. And so now you look at, what could this be for this year? I think he's in line for something like 600 snaps, especially with the depth Baylor has it on the defensive line. They're going to need him to play all of those snaps probably. And I think his, tackle totals are going to go up to, maybe around 40. And I think his sacks numbers could get around that 4 number, which would be really good in Dave Aranda's defense. I know I say 4 sacks, and a lot of people are like, oh, that's not very good. But if you go look at how Baylor wants to attack the quarterback, it's mainly with second-level guys, not the first level. So 4 sacks is actually really good. And I think Cooper Lance is going to kind of jump off the screen to a lot of people to see he and Jackie Marshall anchoring those 2 spots at defensive end, defensive tackle.
Yeah, so he played, and I know he was banged up a little bit last year. Don't I have that right?
His ankle.
Yeah, it's like that was throughout the season. Only played 268 snaps. PFF has him specifically listed as a nose tackle, so played the majority of his snaps there, as we discussed. But yeah, you want the defensive line to be tough. Trevin Maai, great example, like kind of not come out of nowhere. Like we kind of talked about him last offseason, just how much he had improved. Cooper, I think he's just he can be at a different level than even in Trevin. Like he's going to bring that tough physical ability, but he's also very strong. Not that Trevin wasn't very strong, plays with good leverage. I really like him at that end position. And truthfully, of all the guys, he's probably the most undersized. Listed at what 290 ish, whatever it is. He's going to fluctuate for the season, but I like that quite a bit. And if there's another guy, like, I mean, DK makes a lot of sense just based on what we've heard from him, but we don't what is the baseline for him? We don't really know yet what they can get from the nose tackle position. Now, if he just comes out and is like, you can't take him off the field because he's playing so well, then yeah, absolutely break out. But nose tackle by committee makes the most sense right now. Cooper makes the most sense from he's played a ton of football. He has that potential to actually, like you mentioned, become a statistical producer. And Trevin did it a little bit last year, but I think Cooper has that ability to go to the next level this year.
All right, moving on to the edge position. I know you and I are going to disagree on this one, and not really disagree because I just think we think the edge position is going to take a big step forward. Just too much inconsistency with Steve Linton last year and Garmin Randolph just never really hitting a ceiling that really was significant. And so now you look at kind of how they revamped the unit, and they went with two very different prospects, which I actually very much enjoy from Dave Aranda and this staff. So you got Oregon transferring Marion Winston, who's more of your every down type guy, a guy who's going to play a lot more snaps probably and is much stronger against the run. But the guy I'm going with is Matthew Fobbs-White, the Tulane transfer. Small. I mean, when people see him on the field, you're going to be like, man, that guy's playing edge. He's going to be lining up on the defensive line because he's only like, I think 230, 235, something along those lines. But the thing I continue to hear about him all offseason is how fast he is. And just like his ability to run down quarterbacks is going to be a problem for a lot of teams. And if they're thinking you're going to have that Shedeur Sanders situation where he's just running around for an hour and then throwing a Hail Mary, that will not happen with Matthew Fobbs-White out there. And so my case for him is that there's just a big jump coming as a pass rusher. Last year at Tulane, he posted a 91.3 pass rush grade, which Tulane plays high-level competition. It's not your typical G5 program. They play good teams, and he was pretty excellent in most of those games. And when I went back and looked through the history of, kind of what Baylor has been on the defensive line with their true edges or defensive line guys, no defensive lineman for Baylor has hit the 7 sack number since 2019, which was Matt Rule's defense, and that was James Lynch. Yeah. And no edge has had more than 4.5 sacks in a season since Dave Aranda arrived. I think that Matthew Fobbs-White's going to clear that number. I think he's going to get to 5, 6, maybe 7 sacks. And those QB pressures and sacks are so valuable in my eyes because it's been one of the biggest areas lacking in Baylor's defensive scheme because they've had to get pressure from second levels of the defense. I think Fobbs-White gives them a chance to get it from the first level at a high level.
Yeah, I mean, this goes back to the previous discussion about the fall camp, but they need to win one-on-one matchups in pass rush. He has that ability to. And we talked about this. You have two different guys, Matthew Fobbs-White and Marion Winston. I really like Fobbs-White. Like I think there's that dynamic of, you mentioned it, just chasing things down in the backfield, making those plays. He's built like a linebacker. I mean, you look at him, Keaton Thomas is going to be very similar builds considering the positions they play. But I think with the Marion Winston, and the reason I will go in that direction is because I think he's going to earn his way into a lot more snaps and ultimately more production. Not that they're not going to play together. I think there's always a discussion like, can they play two outside linebackers together? Well, this might be that case where they can truly do it. And you mentioned figuring out, who was playing edge for Dave Aranda at Baylor. It's like, dude, Garmin Randolph's been playing edge for Baylor for pretty much the entirety of Dave Aranda's career at Baylor. Like wasn't Garmin recruited by Matt Rule's staff? And was it holdover?
It's been Garmin and Kyler. Kyler's played a lot too.
Yeah, and so you brought in Steve Linton last year. You brought in the transfer from Western Kentucky that kind of caused the issues against Colorado. But they haven't had that high end potential. I think they have two guys now, and Marion Winston's you start talking about evaluations out of the portal. Matt Pallage had a direct line to call about Amari Winston to Oregon, and he's just been buried behind some really talented dudes. And I think Baylor got two guys that have the potential to break out at edge, and I think this is the best room that they have had under Dave Aranda. And when this defense plays well, when Dave Aranda has a playmaker at that position, this defense kind of goes to another level. Same with Starr. You play well at that position, the whole defense works. I think they have this one figured out where Starr's still kind of in the air.
Definitely. All right, moving to linebacker. This position got a little more intriguing, I would say, over the past couple weeks, but I still think the answer is pretty clear here, just based on what we've heard all offseason. It's just been consistent about Fresno State transfer Phoenix Jackson. Yeah. I don't know what more there really is to say here. Last year, he had 4 sacks, 16 QB pressures, 2 interceptions, 4 pass breakups, a forced fumble. Like, this guy does a lot of things. He lives in the backfield. He creates havoc. Last year, I mentioned Ra Dilworth and Caleb Parker played a combined 250 snaps last fall at essentially the star position, but I think they call it the dime or something along those lines. But I think he's going to eat up all of those. I think he's going to be the true backup for Keaton Thomas at will. So that's a lot of snaps that are going to be available. I mean, Keaton Thomas and Matt Jones both played 840 snaps apiece. That's a lot of snaps up for grab. I don't think they'll need to play those guys that many snaps again this year as starters, specifically Keaton. So I think a lot of that will go to Phoenix Jackson. And the other ways he can impact are maybe you line him up at edge. Maybe you line him up at star and have 3 linebackers on the field. There's a lot of versatility here, but I think just in the long run, this is a guy that I think throughout the season, you're going to be like, man, this is one of their more impactful defenders at getting into the backfield and creating havoc, creating bad plays, being around the football a ton. I like everything that I've heard from Phoenix Jackson, everything that I've seen so far this offseason.
Yeah. Caleb Parker. The teams that he played the most against: Iowa State, 46 snaps, West Virginia, 20, Kansas, 24. Nothing against Caleb, nothing against Ra, who played, the majority. I think he played a lot of snaps early against Utah. But Phoenix in that role of playing all of those snaps is much different. And I'm really anxious. He can do everything. I like him as that linebacker, kind of a hybrid safety linebacker, not the star, but that type of role. I really like him in that role. But if I'm going to a linebacker, man, Phoenix makes sense. But just to be a contrarian, Colin Reed is just, what's a breakout for him is going to be a lower threshold. If he ends up with 65 tackles from the middle linebacker position, that's a breakout to me. If he can play consistently, he's the number one guy there. And it sounds like it's trended that way a little bit. Travion Barnes is going to be in the mix, absolutely. But Colin Reed, that's an easy pick for me if it sounds like he's going to be the starter and play quite a bit. He's a young guy. He's going to build stats really fast, playing that middle linebacker position if he's starting. So I'm going that way, but Phoenix Jackson's hard to say no against if he's consistently being utilized to create havoc. Because if you're creating havoc, your numbers look really good regardless of what else you do. Everybody likes stats. Everybody likes sacks and interceptions, et cetera, and he has the ability to do that.
Yeah, I think the tough thing with Kyland is that there's a much lower floor. You don't necessarily know exactly what you're going to get from him. I think with Phoenix, at least you know, right? You know that he should be productive and everything we've heard. But that's why I said, it's gotten more interesting because Kyland is looking like
we don't know what they're going to do. We don't we don't know what this package is going to look like. I mentioned this on a previous episode, and I know we got to move on, but Dave Aranda has self-admittedly said, people have caught up to my old schemes. I'm going to have to adjust. Yeah. What is his plan with this linebacker group? I think that's where it starts. We don't know what they're going to do against Auburn. And that's kind of exciting that he has a lot of dudes in that room right now.
Yeah, all 4 of those guys will play a lot of football, I think, this fall. Moving over to safety, breakouts, I do think you can break out even if you've had good seasons in the past, even if you've played a ton. At safety, I'm going to go with Devin Bobby. And there's a lot of reasons for this, but I think the end of last year is my biggest reason. He had 3 interceptions during the stretch of 5 games at the end of the year. Over the final 5 games of the year, I think he was playing his best football of his career. And I do think that you look through his PFF grades, 3 of his best 5 graded performances of his career came at the end of last year. And so I think it's about putting a full season together like that. And I think there's room for him to. And honestly, I think Baylor needs him to. They need him to take advantage of situations where he has an opportunity to create a turnover. He has an opportunity to create a big play. He has an opportunity to be a leader in this room. I just think he is probably the most sure thing at the safety spot, especially since we know Carl Williams is not 100% right now. I just think Devin Bobby kind of needs to be the answer for them if they're going to put together a good secondary.
Yeah, I mean, for the safety room in general, be where you're supposed to be. I was watching the West Virginia game, and it seemed like play action pass, one of the safeties out of position, somebody's running across the middle of the field wide open. I mean, it happened so often last year. So the bare minimum, this safety room needs to be where you're supposed to be. Trust your eyes of what's going on. Know, be where your feet are. It's kind of like what the coaches say, but like for Devin, he has to become the playmaker. He has to be the guy that's consistently out there. He's undersized, but he can get interceptions. He had another a ball that maybe it was the West Virginia game.
It was
where the ball goes in it, just like a fluke deal, and they score a touchdown. But it was a great play by him. It just happened to be that it didn't work out entirely right, and they score. And if he doesn't tip it, it's probably not. It's probably an incomplete pass. But he was there for the majority of the last half of the season. He was in the correct positions. The rest of the safety room needs to do what they need to do. But I agree with you. Breakout wise, like he has that potential to do that Chris Miller jump. Everybody's like, heck yeah, this is what we've wanted from one season to the next. And he becomes that. We saw it at the end of last year. I just hope it continues at the beginning of this year.
Yeah, moving over to the final position, which is cornerback. I feel like this one's going to be consensus, but we'll see. I have heard great things about Tevin Williams III. Yeah. I mean, all offseason, he has been their number one cornerback. All offseason. Like, it has been resounding. No one else is getting, the key high leverage first string snaps over him. And so if he can stay healthy, I think he's going to be really good. In 2024, he was top 5 in PFF defensive grade. He was the number 2 guy in coverage, only behind Lorando Johnson. He took a big step forward from what happened in 2023. But the problem is he still missed a ton of time, which has been consistent with him. He has not been able to stay healthy. But if he does, there's upside here. And everything that I've heard about, he and Paul Gonzalez, it's worked out really well. I think there's a perfect match kind of between those two, as he's the veteran in the room, the guy that's truly a leader in that room. And so the more that I look at this, the more that I think this is going to be his year. And what I mean by his year, I look at guys like Jamison Houston in 2019, Kalen Barnes in 2021, and Lorando Johnson in 2024, who had big final seasons at Baylor. Some of those guys hadn't had good seasons before that, but they ended up putting it all together in their final year. I think Tevin Williams is a great candidate for that this season.
Yeah. I mean, and you mentioned it. Stay on the field, and if don't, it's unfortunate because of these injuries, sometimes concussions, other things, like there's nothing they can do about that. It's not this, broken leg, torn ACL. It's just unfortunate type deals, like freak deals that happen. And obviously you want to be careful with concussions, but yeah, stay on the field. And because his career numbers backs up. I mean, he's only played 604 snaps, but his career numbers say he's a good tackler. He's good in coverage. And he's going to be where he needs to be. And I think it was Dave Aranda that mentioned that recently. We know that he's cerebral. He's going to be where he needs to be. He understands the assignment, but now it's taking that next step, and he has to have that confidence grow in him. I really like this matchup with Paul Gonzalez and him working with Tevin and just his background and the way that he's coached different guys in the past. I really like Tevin. If I'm going breakout player, I really like LeVar Thornton. He's a guy that he's so long, he's fast, and you've heard these whispers about him the last couple of years, just like he's this close. He's right there to becoming that guy. Well, now it seems like he might be the starter. He might be the starter opposite of Tevin. There's guys in the mix, Caden Jenkins, Calvin Simpson-Hunt, but I think LeVar's potential there is kind of the higher end of the group. And if he can live up to that and be that really good corner opposite of Tevin, that's huge for this defense. And especially when the safeties have potential problems, to have 2 really good corners, very serviceable, above average corners in this scheme is big. And I'm interested to watch LeVar this year because we've seen it flash at times, but we've also seen his youth and his development still needing to come along. So opposite of Tevin, I like LeVar Thornton, and that's big if they can have that second guy emerge.
Yeah, I like LeVar a lot too. And I think people will discount Caden Jenkins, but I think he gives them a lot of stability and depth. I think he's due for a bit of a rebound after what was a tough year last year. But that's it. Those are our breakouts for the 2025 season. Colt and I will be back to preview Auburn next week. We might have a premium mailbag as well. So if you're not a Sikkim 365 premium subscriber, please be sure to join. We got all kinds of content, including some premium episodes of the Bearcast that you're currently missing out on. So be sure to go check out Sikkim 365 premium. But that's it for today. Thanks for listening. This has been the Bearcast on Sikkim365.com.
Join Sikkim 365 Premium on a $1 for 1 month trial to read our experts' notes and insights. Know about high school commits, off-season transfers, coaching staff changes, and so much more before the rest. Also, download the Sikkim 365 app on your iPhone today to get instant notifications of breaking news, read up on the latest inside info, easily interact with other Baylor fans on our forums, and get alerts for anything published by your favorite staff members.